So, Luke, a new year is upon us. Do you have any and a new decade, of course, any new decade resolutions?
Not really, Michael, apart from just a simple one. In the words of Biggie Smalls, you gotta get paid and blow up like the World Trade.
And I assume he said that with reference to the World Trade attack that happened before he died, as opposed to the one that happened after he died.
Yes, that would make sense.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, for me, like, my thoughts on New Year's resolutions has always been like, they're too abrupt. It's like people are like, oh, it's New Year's Eve, I'm gonna stuff my face full of chocolate. And it's like, what's your New Year's resolution? It's like, I want to eat no chocolate next year. It's like, well, no, you're not going to be able to do that. So my New Year's resolution, I guess, is just generally to try and get, more things in order. Read more, maybe even get back on the whole Duolingo thing. You try and make sure that we can improve the quality with our online ventures as much as possible. Things like that. But like, I don't want to I don't like being like, oh, I'm going to do definitively this starting on January 1st. I want to kind of introduce things slowly. So yeah, there we go.
Okay, thanks for that.
Hello and welcome to Select and Reflect, the Decade Review podcast where we take decades from the near and distant past, we give them a couple of experiences of having lived through them, and evaluate them beyond first impressions. I'm your host Michael, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Luke, and this day we are looking at the decade 2010 through to 2019. Luke, why don't you tell us a thing or two about this decade?
Well, certainly, Michael. So, the 2010s, pronounced 2010s or 2010s, is the current decade in the Gregorian calendar that began on the 1st of January 2010 and will end on the 31st of December 2019. The decade began amid a global financial crisis and subsequent international recession dating from the late 2000s. The resultant European sovereign debt crisis became more pronounced early in the decade and continued to affect the possibility of a global economic recovery. Austerity policies particularly affected Portugal, Ireland, Greece and Spain. And yeah, it goes on to details about the Arab Spring. We can't forget the United States continued to retain its global superpower status, with China challenging them at long last. So yeah, that happened. And obviously we can't forget the internet. And we can't forget shifting social attitudes as well, which we shall talk about as well. So yeah.
Yeah, we shall.
Yes, we shall. So yeah, that's just a bit of background. Can you tell us what we're going to be talking about today? The three main topics.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about, quite simply, film/TV, because despite my previous introduction, this is in fact a movie review podcast. And we're also going to be talking about then culture, more, I guess you'd say more the societal aspect of culture, because of course you can say that film and TV are part of culture, but more the society aspect of culture. And then we're going to be concluding by looking at the politics. I suppose we should just jump into the film/TV news, shouldn't we? But I think the most important question is, did you like this decade, Luke?
Did I like this decade? Well, this is the first decade I can fully remember, and I kind of wish that's not the case. I think ultimately this decade will not be remembered fondly by myself, and I think many other people across the world who are in our generation as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a long decade. And yeah, it's also, the first decade I can fully remember, and I can't say I liked it. I certainly have a lot of nitpicks though, but let's forego those and just look at some of the big film happenings,
yes.
Film/TV happenings, and what do you think should be the first thing we talk about? Because I'll tell you what I think it should be. I think it should be this. Have you heard of this thing? It's called Marvel.
Well, interesting you say that, Michael, because on the 2010s Wikipedia page it says superhero films became box office leaders with Avengers Endgame. Have you heard of that? Becoming the highest grossing film of all time, grossing over $2.7 billion worldwide. So there you go. $2.7 billion. Of course, that was the endpoint to the Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And yeah, I guess since we talk about movies on Select and Reflect, the best place to start is Marvel and their absolute dominance of this decade. Do you want to just talk a bit about, I guess, how successful they've been?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could also talk more abstractly about Disney, but of course we're going to be talking a lot about Disney in this reflection, because Disney have certainly been smashing it. The Marvel thing, I mean, obviously it started in 2008, where they were like, I think the one significant thing that's happened out of this is that, of course, prior to this, you had the big name superhero films were making the rounds. Obviously, you had in the 70s, Superman. In the 80s, you had Batman. In the 2000s, then, and obviously you had Batman in the 90s. In 2000, you had Spider-Man and X-Men. And of course, you had a Batman reboot with Batman Begins, and you had the Superman reboot with Superman Returns. So all of these classic kind of superheroes coming out. And then, of course, you had Marvel, who was like, oh shit, we sold off the rights to all of our best superheroes. Let's try, Iron Man. And boom, it worked. So that was nice. I think I enjoy the Marvel films that came out before 2010. I feel like by 2010, you sort of already were beginning to see the same formula coming in. I mean, really, I've never been completely on board with this whole Marvel thing, but I guess they had a good business model, and it was like, having such a vast
Well, you say they had a
universe.
good business model, but you look at the failures of other cinematic universes.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, the logical conclusion, I think, to draw from the Marvel Cinematic Universe success is that they didn't have things, like, they shouldn't have been a success, because it was the Marvel Cinematic Universe is stupid.
It is.
Like,
yes.
the idea of having, I mean, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The idea of having Iron Man, a war profiteer who uses technology to fight terrorists, and Thor, a Norse god who needs to defeat his evil trickster brother Loki in the same universe is really dumb. And because of that, they kind of had to just make fun films that embrace that. Whereas with the other cinematic universes, they on the surface kind of are good ideas. I mean, DC makes far more sense of the cinematic universe because you've got Batman and Superman, the big ones, and then Cyborg, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. These are like people who should only exist in the context of like a big, like the Justice League makes sense. I'm like, okay, yeah, all the Justice League characters are kind of similar. So it makes sense that would be a cinematic universe. It makes sense that X-Men would be a cinematic universe. It makes sense that the Universal Monsters would be a cinematic universe. It makes sense that the kind of. I mean, I can be like, oh, because I mean, that was back in the 30s when they were like, oh, Dracula meets the Wolfman. And it was like hokey, but at least it's got a pretense. And it makes sense to me that like the Monsterverse, because you even had that back when Japan was like, oh yeah, Godzilla versus Mothra. Like they had these pretenses. So they were just like, oh, great, problem solved. We'll just take these things and they work together so perfectly. There's no way we could fail. But guess what, Luke? They failed. So, I mean, that would be my explanation really for why they failed. I think genuinely these people who make these films have no idea what they're doing. So unless they are literally given kitty gloves, foundation paper, easiest thing, everything going for them, they can't succeed. And in this context, they were lulled into a false sense of security where, everything needed to be right for them. But they were just like, no, if we can't just throw all of these guys together and have it automatically be a success, we just don't know what to do. So yeah, that's my explanation. They're basically just idiots who got overconfident. What's your explanation, Luke, for why these
things failed? Yeah. Well, essentially, you have to look at a project like this. I think it helps that you have one guy at the center of it. And obviously with Marvel, it was Kevin Feige. It was his brainchild. He's still in charge of all of these movies and still in charge of the cinematic universe. And that is why it has been so successful, because it's one guy's vision. And the guy is very good at what he does. So that's why it's successful. You think about Warner Brothers and their Justice League thing. But, I mean,
yeah,
he was the guy who was making
Zack Snyder.
He was just hired. He was just the director. There wasn't a guy plotting it out from the beginning. It's like, this is what's going to happen here. This is what's going to happen here. Like, there wasn't a Kevin Feige equivalent. And you could say the same.
Well, I mean, sorry, I was just going to say, the thing with DC, apart from anything else, is that they were rushing it like mental.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, like, if you had someone like Kevin Feige, he'd be like, no, at DC, it's like, no, we shouldn't rush it. We want to get this right. We can't rush it. But again, then, obviously, with the context of Marvel being so successful, someone like Kevin Feige would never get hired at DC in the first place, because they were just like, no, get this out, get me Batman v Superman, get me fucking Wonder Woman, Batman v Superman in our fucking second movie. Like, already that's pretty much the Justice League already. Absolutely no build up, and they wonder why the Justice League failed so horribly.
You're forgetting the email file that she sent. That was the best build up I've ever seen for a cinematic universe.
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh, God.
No, yeah, and obviously you got with the Dark Universe, they had the thing where it was like, I mean, I haven't seen that Mummy film, but I remember hearing
it was very bad.
They go into this room and they've got like all of the kind of artifacts from the old, like there's a mummy and there's Dr. Jekyll, like one of the characters is Dr. Jekyll, and they've got like, I don't know, a Wolfman claw or something like that. They've got all of these different things. It's like, hey, just slow down. Like, that's the thing. If they would have, and the thing is, like, by all means, announce it ahead. Be like, yeah, we're planning on doing this, cinematic universe where, eventually you'll get to see all of these really cool superheroes or horror movie monsters or giant King Kong level monsters fight against each other, but we're going to take it slow. We're not going to go mental at first, and that's your plan. But they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said just then reminds me of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 with the Ream of spin-offs, I believe, when the Green Goblin's walking through and you see all the supervillain costumes of what's that guy called in the Octopus guy, Dr. Octopus.
Dr. Octopus.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff like that, and it's like, okay, right. We can see what's happening here, and ultimately the Amazing Spider-Man failed because it was a god-awful movie, and Sony had to give the rights to Marvel, which again is kind of hilarious. But yeah, it's just if you plan things out and you don't have pressure, then things ultimately, like what happened with Avengers Endgame, that's what the payoff is. That is the ultimate payoff, and Marvel got that, Kevin Feige got that, and again, it's probably because they started off with no pressure. It's just like a Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man and Thor. Like, who gives a shit about these characters? Nobody did. So, therefore, without that pressure, they could just craft a universe which eventually became literally the biggest pop culture thing of the decade.
One question, actually, is, do you wish that there were more successful cinematic universes? Because I think that's an interesting question, because obviously we can say that these cinematic universes failed, but I personally, I'm not that on board with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not like, I don't wake up every day and think, yeah, I'm so happy the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the thing. I can really take or leave it. So I'm wondering, like, do you think that it's a bad thing or a good thing or an altogether neutral thing that these other cinematic universes have failed?
I think it's a good thing, because I'll just tell you my personal experience. I really was looking forward to Marvel Cinematic Universe early in the decade and like how it was all going to go. I remember like watching a string of movies in 2014 and just looking forward on the Wikipedia page to like the Marvel Phase 3 and all the films that were planned out. I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to all fit together. Because that, in my mind, I like planning stuff out and having a big master plan, I guess, and all of that. That appeals to me. And so I was very intrigued with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and obviously you see they did it well. So I think it was good. I think it's really cool to see because, again, like 15 years ago, something like this was never attempted. Like, could this actually happen? Could you actually have Thor and Iron Man in the same universe with separate movies? It would seem so far-fetched. But the fact that they pulled it off, I'd say yes, I did like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but your original question, which was, do you really want to see other cinematic universes? I'm kind of like, well, no, I don't really care, because I think Marvel have pulled it off. Marvel have shown that it's possible. So that's enough for me, really. I don't really care about a DC cinematic universe, to be honest, because I've seen Marvel do it. That's the appeal to me, is can you get this thing working? Can you get all these movies, all these characters working? And eventually, yeah, it did. Avengers Endgame, the highest grossing film of all time. Wasn't the best movie ever, but considering the scale and the task, they pulled it off. So yeah, I think overall, I do support Marvel and what has happened. I did like it, but again, going forward, I don't really care. That's what I'd say.
Okay. See, I'm almost the opposite in that I agree with you that I am impressed by Marvel objectively, by what they're able to achieve. But I think my attitude is, as I said from the very beginning, I think that there are many other things which are more suited to a cinematic universe, and I would be interested. For example, I would actually like to see a successful Aquaman, or a successful Cyborg Man, I can't remember their names, films and things like that. And I think really it would probably add something to it if they were part of a Justice League cinematic universe. But then having said that, who cares? Because I don't know, they're going to mess it up a lot of times. So it's really, that's the thing. It kind of is almost, when you look at these failed attempts of, cinematic universes, it almost disenchants you with the whole studio thing, because it's like they're literally just throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks. So it's almost like, it's like at this point, if they even get something right, you're just like, oh, look, some shit stuck. That's it. But speaking of shit sticking, we of course got one attempt to make not really a cinematic universe, but many attempts to relaunch franchises with, of course, the world famous reboots. I think the big one for me, you've already mentioned it, but the Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man coming onto the scenes in 2012, 5 years after the original Spider-Man 3. And then, of course, what was it not in 2017 that we got the Amazing Spider-Man, not the Amazing, the Spider-Man Homecoming, and of course that was 3 years after the failure of the Amazing Spider-Man 2. So Spider-Man's been rebooted to high heaven.
3 different franchises in 10 years.
Yes, mental. The other big reboot, of course, is Star Wars. Can you think of any other big reboots that stand out for you?
I mean, the one that you put me on the spot here. I can't really think of big reboots. I just remember like every single summer, like for example, last summer, like Baywatch, stuff like that, just coming out.
I mean, obviously there was 21 Jump Street, which was that in 2010?
Yeah, I think around
around 2010. Yeah.
And also you got a reboot of Star Trek that has happened. Obviously, again, one of the most popular things of all time, being rebooted again this decade. And the question is, Michael, obviously, everyone knows how many reboots and sequels there are. If literally pretty much every popular movie, the highest grossing movie is part of a cinematic universe like Marvel, so that you could say it's kind of a sequel. For example, you wouldn't say like Doctor Strange is a sequel of Thor, but it's the same kind of cinematic universe, so it kind of counts. And all these movies, even movies which aren't sequels or reboots, are based off existing properties. So things that are already successful. You could look at the Hunger Games, for instance, and what happened there, and obviously the previous decade Harry Potter. But yeah, you still had.
And of course, we get the reboot, which is Fantastic Beasts. That's another one, Fantastic Beasts. Well done. So the question is, we've had all these reboots, we've had all these sequels, we've had remakes and all that. So why is that? Why have we seen so much of that in this decade? Well, the big
I have a theory.
Thing that started the whole reboot thing was actually, weirdly enough, a decade prior to the start of this decade just gone, which was, of course, Tim Burton's The Planet of the Apes, where he said it's a reimagining. I think he might have even used the term reboot, because prior to that, I think that was literally the first time anyone had ever used the phrase, because back before that point, you had remakes. Of course, you get the famous almost shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, starring Vince Vaughn. People remade things. And I was thinking in a way, I don't think you would get remakes anymore. I don't think anybody would ever be like, let's remake a film.
Well, yeah, you just.
I almost feel like we're past that point now.
Again.
Yeah, because now people say, "Oh, we're not going to remake something. We're going to reboot it."
It's three women instead of three men. There you go.
With a gimmick, or you redo it with a slightly different plot, or you obviously do the soft reboot. They could have genuinely, like, the way that they did Star Wars Episode 7, they might as well have just remade Episode 4. They might as well be like, okay, we're going to remake Episode 4 with new characters, and that's going to be kind of our way of starting off, and then we can do all sorts of new things with our new Han, Luke, and Leia. We're literally going to remake, we're going to have Darth Vader back, we're going to have Grand Moff Tarkin back, we're going to have the Emperor back, we're just going to remake it. They could have done that, and it possibly would have made more sense for them to do that, considering what they ended up doing with The Force Awakens. But they didn't, because remakes, you don't do them anymore, you do reboots.
I think,
but yeah, what's your theory?
I think Star Wars is a bit different, by the way, because they're pumping out episodes consistently. It's a bit different to all the others. But yeah, why is there reboots of things like Ghostbusters? Why is there sequels? Or why is Star Trek back? Why are there so many sequels to everything?
80s nostalgia.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a part of it. But why? Basically, the question I was asking myself when considering why this trend happened is, well, what is the reason that studios pump out these movies? Because of financial stability. We talked before, a few weeks ago, about Deadpool, about how the studios nearly killed that movie. Again, it's not a great movie. It's a fine movie. It's good. But it grossed $700 million, I think, from my memory. How could a studio crush a movie that grossed $700 million? Well, because it wasn't a popular property. Nobody had heard of Deadpool until the movie came out. Literally, I had no idea what that movie was before I saw it. And so, this is the result of the studios being very safe, just trying to produce stuff that actually works. Fuck it. I just remembered the Ben-Hur remake. Do you remember that?
Oh,
Ben-Hur. They spent $100 million on that movie. $100 million because it's Ben-Hur. I think, honestly, the rise of these reboots, and you can even say comic book movies to maybe a lesser extent, because I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe was started before this. But anyway, all these remakes and sequels and reboots, I think it was caused by the 2008 financial crisis, which I think that is the lasting legacy of. Well, that's the thing. It happened in the previous decade, but its effects, of course, because it happened in 2008, really take root in this decade in pop culture, in politics, in every aspect of our lives. And obviously, studios, they want consistent profit with no risks. Then that becomes the business model for the last decade. There's no space for anything original. Studios are like, well, we're not going to put this movie out Well, at all. We're not going to put this movie out in June, a popular time. We're going to put it, at the end of the year. I just watched a film like Knives Out, which had a lot of, very famous cast members just punted to the end of the year because they don't want it to compete with big summer movies. And it's because, they just want to make sure that they make bank. Like, they have movies which are consistently making profit. Yeah. And so I think that is the ultimate reason why we have seen all of this stuff. And people, decrying it like, oh, why aren't there any more new movies? Why is everything sequels? Why is everything reboots? Well, I think that's the reason. Like, they are popular. Like, people like going to see it. I was watching Rise of Skywalker the other day, and there was a lady sitting close to me who, when, spoilers by the way, it's not really a big spoiler, when the Ewoks showed back up on the screen right at the end of the movie, she gasps and was like, oh, the Ewoks, like that. And that to me just was like, well, that's why all these movies are produced. That's why. Who the fuck wants a Baywatch movie? Well, Baywatch was a thing people remember, so they're gonna possibly go and see it because they remember liking it back in the day. Why was Deadpool nearly killed? Again, I there's probably better examples, but Deadpool I just think is the famous one because it grossed $700 million and just showed studios that you should take more risks. Yeah,
I mean, my kind of attitude towards it in a way is I almost think it doesn't necessarily matter in that it's not as if there haven't been great films released this year. I think maybe you could say that actually there were more good films released in the 1990s at a time, of course, when
this year's been good.
Bill Clinton, but Bill Clinton was famously like, "It's the economy, stupid." Point being, the economy is really great, so why would you worry about anything? It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. The point of the thing is the economy is great. Even the UK had a surplus in the 1990s. That never happens. But because of that, I think maybe your theory is right that the reason why we got so many good films in the 1990s is because you get these high budget films. Yeah, but having said that, while I think it probably has a minor effect, there are still loads of good films. So I'm almost like, you know what? Let the studios have their pointless, uninteresting cash grabs. Some of them might be good. Some of them may even be great. But at least we've still got a steady stream of films made by people with actual artistic visions. And ultimately, I do think, like, the problem with many of these films is not that they're reboots. It's that they're bad. Like, I mean, you look at The Hobbit. We haven't mentioned that yet, but The Hobbit, of course, was essentially not a reboot, but a similar thing. And the problem with that wasn't that they were making The Hobbit. No one was like, oh, they're making The Hobbit, that sucks. The problem is, like, the way it was made. Again, there really is no issue with... I have no problem with them remaking the Star Trek films with better effects to be more exciting. The problem is that in a variety of ways, they've kind of let the side down. No one was like, oh, I really don't want them to continue the Star Wars story. There's nothing I could possibly want less. No, people were like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Probably a bit cautious about it. And what have we seen? Well, they went in there with no plan. That's an objective thing they did wrong. They went in there with no plan. They could have gone in there with a plan. They could have said, you know what, I have a story. They could have brought a guy in, like George Lucas, but maybe not surrounded by yes men, who'd go in there and say, I've got a story I really want to tell, set in this universe. And that would have made, fine. They could have made it and it would have been good. Like, so in a way, the problem isn't, I know you didn't really say this was a problem, but I think it's worth bringing up. There really isn't a problem with having all these reboots and remakes, because ultimately there are loads of ways you can change stories around and redo things. The problem is that they've taken these stories and they've just made them shit. I don't know why they chose to make them so shit, but
the inherent enthusiasm, though, of studios to make these movies makes them shit. Because at the end of the day, if they're like, well, we've got no ideas, let's just pump out another fucking Star Trek movie or another Alien movie. It's like, or another Terminator movie. It's like, well, yeah, that's the problem. You're just thinking of pumping it out.
Yeah. And I think there are some universes where you literally cannot have, like, for example, Terminator. It's fine. They've done it. Like, so I think, there is a variability to it. Like, some things they can, like, for example, Star Wars, you have that famous line, for over 1,000 generations, the Jedi have kept peace in the galaxy. And in a way, that's like, do whatever you want. I mean, you've got 25,000 years to play with. Tell stories in that time. Having said it, with Terminator, there's a pretty clear structure that was established in the first two films. That at the end they were like, we've got to stop Judgment Day. We can make our own fate. Yeah. Hey, look, they stopped Judgment Day. They made their own fate. And literally anything you do after that point is going to be only invalidating the message of the entire franchise by being like, actually, no, it turns out they need to do it again. So like some films, they can have these reboots and constantly return back to that franchise. Other films are necessarily like closed off and you can't say, let's go back to that. Let's see what's happening in Terminator. Oh, did they really stop Judgment Day? No, they didn't. Oh, they got to do it again. Like 4 more times. Yeah. Great.
Okay, so maybe that you're right. Maybe it's not just I'm not just complaining about the reboots. It's the fact that these reboots are all the time, they're seemingly bad. Like, they're very rarely good. And I think that...
Bad or unnecessary.
That comes from the studio's desperation of trying to get these movies out because they want to make money. And again, because their security was threatened by the financial crisis in 2008. Interestingly, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, of course, it was conceived and started before that financial crisis happened. I do wonder if Kevin Feige thought of this idea, say in 2010, whether Marvel would have given the green light to go ahead with Iron Man and Thor, considering I'd imagine their financial situation would not have been as healthy.
What they would have done is they would have gone, I don't know. I mean, people don't want to see Iron Man and Thor. Let's do the Avengers. Let's jump straight to the Avengers.
That's exactly, something like that. So
yeah, exactly, because they would have been nervous. They would have gone, no, we've got to do the Avengers because that'll be bigger. And then of course the Avengers would come out and go, what is this shit? Why is that God arguing with that frozen beefcake from the 40s?
Okay,
Anyway, moving on. So speaking of Disney, of course, as I said we would, let's talk about Disney's thing that they decided to do this decade. And indeed, they did decide to do this very much this decade, because the first example of this that I can think of, I mean, obviously they had Hook and things like that, and they had that Peter Pan remake, which I think actually might have not been distributed by Disney. They did another one. They did Pan, but they did another one in 2000s. Do you remember that? Okay, no. Well, basically, I'm going to officially decide to start this here because it allows us to encompass it completely within the decade, and that is, of course, the Alice in Wonderland remake by Tim Burton in 2010.
Yes.
And obviously that was... I mean, at least that kind of had, they wanted to do this kind of gritty... I mean, it was awful because they basically wanted to turn Alice in Wonderland into Lord of the Rings. And then the second thing they did, just to contextualize this, is in 2013, they did Oz the Great and Powerful, which I know basically nothing about.
That, yeah.
And then the big one, this is when it became like a thing, because even though they've done it twice now, they've done Alice in Wonderland, they've done Oz the Great and Powerful, the big one that drove it home was Maleficent, starring Angelina Jolie, which again... I mean, they tried to do something with that, and I guess, again, I haven't seen that film, but they tried to basically tell the story from the perspective of the villain, and as far as I can tell, they didn't do anything absolutely cancerous with it, but it probably wasn't great. And then, of course, in 2015, they had Cinderella, and then, I mean, from that point onwards, floodgates open. I mean, is it this year, or was it last year? I think it was, they released 3 in a year.
I think the Disney, all these live action animated Disney movies, yes, I think it does just have to do with something we were talking about before with, financial security with these movies. When you put The Lion King out, it's going to make a ton of money. But also, I think, Disney aren't in a bad financial state. I think the major reason for that is just basically, it's been 20 years since the Disney Renaissance. You think about when nostalgia kicks in and when remakes are often remade, it's about 20 years. So you have these incredible movies in the 90s. Obviously, Cinderella is an exception to this, but you've got all these incredible movies. So Disney is hey, why don't we just remake them? Because people now probably are clamoring for them. Do you know how much The Lion King grossed, Michael?
Not much,
no,
I guess.
It was a lot.
Did it get
a lot? It was second highest grossing movie of the year.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's depressing.
It is depressing, but people like this shit, man. People do. People remember it.
Yeah, people are idiots.
People are idiots. That's the conclusion from the decade that we take away.
I mean, I guess in a way this does make me like a complete idiot, because what I literally said, at the start of this, I was like, you can't do remakes anymore. They don't work. I guess you'd say it's technically still a reboot, because they're like, oh, well, I mean, at least, actually, the weird thing is actually, in a way, it started off as reboots. Obviously, Alice in Wonderland was a huge reboot. They were like, let's make it Lord of the Rings. Oz the Great and Powerful, obviously a reboot. I mean, it's about the Wizard of Oz. Maleficent, reboot. I think maybe Cinderella was the first one that wasn't a reboot. And then they were like, oh, wow, we don't have to really... I mean, obviously they changed some things, but they have been pretty much remaking them. But there's no reason at all. Because...
There is no reason.
I mean, this is obvious, but Lion King is the best example, because animation... Almost always, animation gets a bonus point in terms of quality, because animation is almost inherently more artistic than live action.
CGI lines.
Whatever else you say, you can...
Talking.
Yeah, you can say I like Lion King because of the art. If the Lion King didn't have the great art, you go, whatever. And then they were like, oh yeah, let's do it. Let's do it without the art. It's like, well, why would you do that? I mean, the Jungle Book, the kind of map paintings in that they have in the background, the scenery is really nice looking in obviously the 60s. But then they remake it. I'm like, why would you do that? It's the weird thing is, in a way, it would almost make more sense for them to remake the Pixar films, because a lot of those aren't artistic apart from Coco. But yeah, they're like, oh no, let's remake the most beautiful films we've ever done that really kind of show what animation can do. Great. Well done, you idiots. And well done, the entire population, for eating them up.
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, Disney, again, I think they just capitalize on this. They saw how people were doing remakes and they were like, oh yeah, let's jump on that bandwagon and make a ton of money.
Anyway, so if you're here for our red hot film takes, you can leave now, because now we're going to talk about Netflix. Actually, Netflix has films, or TV in general. So obviously, there's been a big thing that happened in the 2010s.
Really big thing.
So it used to be, if you wanted to watch TV, you'd sit down and you'd watch TV. Whereas one day someone was like, what if you could stream TV? What if it was YouTube but TV? and that was Netflix. And basically, it's crazy. I mean, it makes sense. Like you can watch it, you can just sit down and watch something all the way through. I think that's the main thing. I think the two things that we're talking about, another one, that kind of rise of the actual subscription service, which is like, obviously now YouTube has its own TV shows, and like Apple, have you seen like the advert around that's like for, I can't think what it is, like Dickinson or something, and it's like you can only watch this on Apple TV.
No, I haven't.
Like, I don't know.
I haven't.
They're like, I don't know, it's like this, it's weird though, it's like this period drama being advertised by Apple TV, and I'm thinking, what? When I think of Apple TV, or like Apple the company, I don't think of period dramas or whatever. So like everyone's getting in on this. Disney Plus, obviously we have now with The Mandalorian, all of these things. And I mean, it's fine. Like, I think ultimately what's inevitably going to happen is what people have already said, which is that Netflix basically made people think, well, actually, I don't really need to pirate anymore because, I've got all of my viewing in one easy package, Netflix. Whereas now, there are all of these packages. You've got to have Disney Plus, you've got to have HBO, you've got to have Netflix, you've got to have Apple TV, you've got to have YouTube Premium, you've got to have Amazon Prime if you're watching like Hulu. And now people are like, let's go back to that pirating thing again. So, I mean, it's fine, like, but I just think...
Well, yeah, there was a glorious...
Now they're just channels again.
Well, remember a period, probably midway through this decade, a glorious period where so much stuff was on Netflix.
That's like when we happened to be at university too. Which
when we were at university, so much stuff was on Netflix, and you didn't really need to pirate stuff, but now obviously, you've got Disney Plus, and you're going to have that old situation again that was at the start of the decade, so many different... Yeah,
and we can't even access Disney Plus, like, can we? So, like, literally, we have to... I mean, they can't even blame us. It's kind of good, actually. We should really get on pirating The Mandalorian now, while we have a moral justification. We should be like, get in it while we can say, hey, Disney, you can't blame us. You didn't even let us watch
Interestingly, in the 2010s Wikipedia page, it does have a section related to this, what we're talking about. It says, cable providers saw a decline in subscriber numbers as cord cutters switched to lower-cost online streaming services, such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Video, Hulu, and Disney+. And I think we see, like, for example, Sky and BT in our country. I mean, can you think of any other, like, cable providers? No, it's pretty much just that. Oh, Virgin Media, I guess. But
I was going to say Virgin, but I wasn't sure whether or not they really did that.
But you see, like, again, if you can't have all three together unless you want to pay extra, obviously. But now again, it's going to be the same thing going forward. Well, there's great shows on Netflix, great shows on Amazon Prime, great shows on Disney Plus, probably great shows on Hulu. I don't know. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say there are. And it's just going to be like, again, fucking hell. Like, we've got so many shows to watch, and there will be, if you want to get all that content, you're going to have to pay a bunch more. So, I think, remember when fucking The Force Awakens was on Netflix? Remember?
Yeah.
And that's Disney's biggest product, and they put it on Netflix. That was that's great. That's never going to happen again, is it? It's never, ever going to happen again.
We're done. It's over. The best part of the decade. I mean, the other thing actually is like the implication it had for the license fee, because obviously there was a period where you could go on iPlayer and watch BBC stuff online, and you didn't have to pay a license fee. And then,
you have to tick a box.
Obviously, they made. Yeah, now you have to tick a box, so they did that. Even I tell you what, I mean, for some reason, things like 4OD and all that stuff, they were really quick getting on that. We can tell that you're running an ad blocker. Please disable it. So well done them. I don't know why YouTube doesn't do that. I'm actually really confused. Like, I'm happy they don't, but I have no idea why it is that you get like BBC and Channel 4 have really got good anti-ad blocker technology, and yet YouTube's like, oh, fine, whatever, we don't care. I mean, maybe it's because they don't make money directly, and they're just like, oh, it's fine. You're just punishing the creator, whatever. But it's weird to me. Anyway, but obviously, on that note, actually, have you heard about how? I think we should talk about this, even though we didn't have it written down. I think it's relevant. The fact that the license fee hangs in the balance now, because the Boris Johnson was talking about potentially getting rid of the license fee or making it. What was he? He was on about something like the BBC. It's not going to be fully public funded now. Like, there's going to be some kind of subscription service introduced. So even the BBC now is going to become like Netflix, which is, I guess, okay, whatever. Well done.
Yeah. Again, that is how we are going to consume media now, with subscriptions to Netflix, Disney Plus, and even the BBC. And I think that's just been such a massive change in these last 10 years that I think people now we're used to it. Now everyone's used to Netflix, but you forget, like 10 years ago, I hadn't even heard of Netflix.
Yeah.
So just massive.
Well, there was actually a period when Netflix, I don't know if you noticed, there was a period when Netflix used to be a service that would not email you, send you films. Like you would go online, you say, I'd like to watch this film, and they would send you a DVD, and then you'd have to return. They were basically just a remote rental service. So that's pretty funny. They use that. The only other thing I wanted to bring up about Netflix actually is, the only thing I wanted to bring up about Netflix other than that was the whole kind of binge watching thing. Because obviously Netflix is their big model, was they're like, oh, we'll release the whole thing in the space of a year. Oh, sorry, on one day, and you can watch the entire series in the space of a week. Or a day, sorry, which I'm completely on board with because I don't like. I often actively wait for a program to finish its run, especially if I get the impression that it's close to finishing its run. I'll be like, I'm not going to watch it until its run's finished because then I can just watch it all in one go. I hate waiting, but
I enjoy watching actually, 3 episodes at a time. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah. I enjoy. I mean, I don't binge watch because I don't know, that messes with my sleeping pattern and stuff. Like if I just spend a whole day watching TV, I would just go mental. But I do like to watch a couple of episodes at a time, and then what is interesting, I was actually reading an article only the other day, which was about how The Mandalorian was released kind of episodically, if that's the right word, where they released it every week. And apparently Disney is saying, yeah, we prefer doing that. We think it actually helps. So maybe there's going to be the big thing that's going to happen in 2020 is we're going to see which model wins out. Is it the dump the entire season in one day model, or is it stick with releasing it sequentially? I would think surely that dumping it all in one day works better, because there are people like me who will watch a series if it gets dumped all in one day, but if it doesn't, we'll kind of just be like, I want to hold off it because I don't want to be sat there waiting for I don't want to watch an episode and get hooked. Well, so at least for me, the dumping method works.
It just feels like we're going to go around in a full circle. From like, like you said with Netflix, you can watch shows whenever you want. You can watch as many as you like, binge watch it. And now Disney is releasing them, The Mandalorian, week after week, just like old TV shows.
So we're just going to end up with TV, but online.
Exactly.
Like, literally the exact same situation. Different, lots of channels, stuff like that. So, I mean, fine. I mean, whatever. At least it means that we don't need to buy TVs anymore. We can just have computers. Anyway.
I was just going to say, one more example of me binge watching stuff. I did watch, I think it was called something about Manhunt. Yeah, Manhunt the Unabomber, something like that. Which is about, obviously, the Unabomber in the late 90s blowing up things because of his, he's an eco-terrorist or whatever. And the true story that followed how he got caught. And it was an incredible show. Again, it aired on, I think, Showtime. That's what it aired on first in the United States. Then Netflix bought it. And that was in the kind of, I think, 2017. Yeah, that period where Netflix just had everything, that golden period. And it was really incredible. And I just stayed up until like 5 a.m. watching all of the episodes because I was so entranced. And I was just like, wow, I could not do this 10 years ago. Isn't this great? So yeah, I'm kind of like you.
Yeah. Oh, the other big thing was the what was it? Making of a Murderer? Wasn't that all on Netflix?
Yeah, Making a Murderer. Yeah. And now I think Showtime. I've got Showtime Plus from what I remember from that Red Letter Media video they did on all the streaming services. So again, like a show like that won't be on Netflix anymore, and you'd have to pay another subscription service to get it. So yeah, things are just going to be back where they started at the beginning of this decade, unfortunately, when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, anyway, that's how the free market works. Beautiful stuff. So
yes, and finally, the big thing that has nothing to do with streaming. Well, it does have nothing to do with streaming, but the big example of conventional TV holding out throughout the decade, that's been with us for this whole decade, was of course Game of Thrones. The only thing that can... What did you think of Game of Thrones? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, the only thing that can compete with Marvel in terms of its impact concerning pop culture. And obviously it was famous because of the fact that characters could die at any point. That was one of its catches. But yeah, I never watched more than like 2 seasons. I wasn't interested in it. Maybe if I watched it again, I would be, but knowing the ending, of course, I'm not going to bother.
Yes.
Maybe the greatest disappointment ever, because obviously people cite The Sopranos, but that was just like the last episode. Yeah. We're talking about how the series actually ended, the disappointment and how bad it was. That wasn't the same. It's not the same thing as The Sopranos.
Yeah. Also, with The Sopranos, I mean, say what you will, but like, I didn't get the impression with The Sopranos it was incompetence. I got the impression with The Sopranos it was more like kind of unconventional storytelling, and that's fine. Like, I mean, I'm on board with that. Like, because sometimes I think, especially if it has a thematic purpose, and in the case of The Sopranos, I kind of got the impression it was all about how, like, this life they're stuck in this organized crime thing, it just continues forever. So in a way, ending like that would be my interpretation. Maybe. And I think there's something you could say is artistic about ending literally mid-sentence. But with Game of Thrones, season 8 and season 7 and season 6 and season 5, they're getting worse and worse as time went on from season 4 onwards. It was incompetence. Like, it was pure incompetence. And that just is so much more annoying. And like I say, it's obviously disappointing because it's like, you can't even, I mean, like I've always said, I mean, what I've been saying from the beginning is I get why there are people who like The Last Jedi. Because while I think there is a degree of objective incompetence in The Last Jedi, I would say, like, at least some of it I can understand from a matter of somebody saying, well, you know, for me, I prioritize the fact that The Last Jedi is very thematic.
Trying.
Over above that. And things like that. Like, basically, it's very clear that Rian Johnson had a clear idea of what he wanted to do, and he did achieve what he wanted to do. So from that perspective, I can understand something like, yeah, I like it. With the Game of Thrones, it was just not well written. Like, characters made stupid decisions. And again, it's so crazy because, like, obviously you were not that on board with it. I think it was possibly one of the best TV shows and dramas to be made, largely just because, apart from anything else, of the amount of, you know, budget it got and things like that. Like, it was almost like you had these film length things that were coming out, and it was, you know, a big expansive story. It had all of these characters, and then nowadays it's just not worth watching because ultimately, like a lot of things, it matters how it ended, and it didn't end well.
Is that
that's
then the biggest disappointment ever for you from something like Game of Thrones, a big show which just fell flat on its face?
Yeah, and I think the other thing we should say is, of course, it's more disappointing than, for example, The Phantom Menace, because I know you didn't mention that, but with The Phantom Menace, you have a complete story with the original trilogy, and you can say, oh, I didn't like The Phantom Menace. Well, that's fine, you can make up your own headcanon for Anakin, but with the Game of Thrones, it was all building up to. This was, you know, it wasn't some alternative storyline or anything like that. It was the end to the actual storyline. So it was also just, it completely destroyed any interest people had in the actual storyline so far, and that's what I think makes it the biggest disappointment, the fact that it was so well constructed in terms of the storytelling, and then it just went so don't approve.
Okay.
Anyway, let's get rid of this film nonsense and talk about the other big thing: society, culture.
Essentially. But just from the Wikipedia page, it does note that, again, one of the major things from this decade was shifting social attitudes, which saw LGBT rights and female representation make substantial progress during the decade, particularly in the West and parts of Asia and Africa. So yes, I think, well, obviously the easiest thing to point to is the legalization of gay marriage, which happened in the UK back in 2013, I want to say. And then it also happened in the United States in 2015. And even across the West, this has happened in a country like Ireland. I think it was in 2017 when it had its referendum. Maybe a bit earlier, and 65% of the population said yes to gay marriage. So there you go. Which means they now legally have to all get gay married. They didn't know that when they said yes to gay marriage. Yeah, always read the small text at the bottom of the ballot. But I think ultimately we will look back in this decade as the real shift, because in how the majority of people perceive homosexual people or people of different races and so on, and obviously sexism as well. We have that whole Me Too thing back in 2017, I think it was. So I think all this, the shift in the culture, I think you can pinpoint it to. I do want to say Barack Obama becoming president may have had an effect on this, because if you have a guy who's black who's never been president, it does make people sit back and think, oh wow, this is something different. This is unusual. And then you have the internet as well, which people now are, they're not wrapped up in their, well, you could say they're wrapped up in a different bubble. They're not wrapped up in a bubble which is like in their hometown.
They're wrapped up in a more inclusive bubble.
I guess so. You think about it, a person, a random person in a small town, it can be in America, it can be in the United Kingdom, it doesn't matter. Like, before the internet, before they go on, like, any social media platform, they think about gays, what, their friend said, what their family says. And I think, again, if you can go on the internet and you have access to more information, therefore, I don't think you become as prejudiced. Like, your views will change. And I believe you see a dramatic shift from, like, 2008 in America to, well, now, I guess, but even until like 2014 or 2015, in how many Americans want to legalize gay marriage. Just an absolute massive shift. And this is all part of, again, I think the internet plays a part in this. It is all part of the culture war, I guess, which has been raging in America, and unfortunately it has picked up here in the UK in this last decade as well, between, the left and, it's not really left and right, it's more like liberal conservative, that kind of culture. War. And again, I think Reagan, it was introduced back then in the 80s. That's when it first got going there. kind of did in the UK, and I would say Brexit, it really picked up around that time in this country. But yeah, I think ultimately the point I'm trying to make with the culture war and the major thing that has happened this decade is now more people are socially liberal than socially conservative. That has been the shift. That has been the change. And that is...
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think, like, obviously the thing that has to be borne in mind is that what you often get with these kind of cultural divisive issues is that what happens is there's a big debate over it, and then eventually the Liberals win, and then, or progressives win, you could say, and then that's it.
The social
like,
issues,
for example, I mean, I know Conservatives don't like to hear this, but it goes all the way back to the women's vote. Like, I mean, it goes back beyond that, but, you know, the Conservatives, they didn't want women to be able to vote. And it was you can't necessarily say it was the exact same reasoning, but it was the same. They were adopting the conservative position. Women haven't been allowed to vote before. It's, you know, natural that women shouldn't be allowed to vote. There's obviously a reason why women aren't allowed to vote, or else we wouldn't have had it that way. Society will fall apart if women are allowed to vote. It will destroy the very institutions of our politics. And then, of course, women got the vote. And now, nobody, or almost nobody, would say, oh yeah, women shouldn't be allowed to vote. And then, of course, you get the same thing. Nowadays, I mean, people are like, oh yeah, of course gay people shouldn't be allowed to get married. Gay people have never been allowed to get married before. There's obviously a reason why gay people haven't been allowed to get married. If gay people get married, it will destroy the very institution of marriage. And of course, now gay people can get married. And eventually, in maybe it'll take 100 years' time, no, not quite 100 years' time, but 50 years' time, whatever else, it will become just one of those things where it's like, in the future, there'll be some other issue. Like, oh, you're against robo rights? Why shouldn't artificially intelligent robots have equal rights? You're just like those people who denied gay marriage. And the conservatives of that, the 2060s will go, what? Don't be stupid. Don't compare. I'm nothing like those barbaric, backwards people who wanted to deny gay people the right to get married. Of course gay people should have the right to get married. So ultimately, yeah, conservatives always lose.
Yeah, eventually. But why? Here's the thing. Why has there been such a massive shift? Because I think there is, in terms of, I mentioned gay marriage, like the whole Me Too movement thing.
I think part of it might just be a reaction to Bush. I mean, you say it's because
I
of
think
Obama.
Obama's one of the reasons people being more open-minded, but also the internet. I think that has been a key factor.
Yeah, definitely the internet, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, like, because with the internet, I think what was interesting with the internet, maybe, is that I almost got the impression when I first started looking at the internet that there was much more of a right-wing tint to the internet. And this could have just been, well, I mean, obviously I was on Reddit, which had a more kind of white male fan base, but also I think, like, the internet was for nerdy, and obviously there's a whole thing with nerd culture, but like a lot of introverted white dudes were all on the internet, who are the kind of people who would have these sort of conservative views more likely. And then eventually, as the internet becomes more popular, a wider variety of people get on there. And obviously there's even an economic thing. I mean, I would almost not be surprised if there was a time not too recently when many African American people would not have really had reliable access to the internet. Because you look at, for example, smartphones and the rise of smartphones. I think that's got a big thing to do with it, because obviously one of the interesting facts is that many people in Africa, they have cell phones or mobile phones. They don't have landline phones because they don't have the infrastructure for landline phones. And obviously I think in a similar way, I wouldn't be surprised if there are places where, because I know people even in the UK who are almost universally black, who, because obviously black people are statistically more likely to be poor, who have to rely on going to the library, or had to rely on going to the library. And this is when I was growing up in school, had to rely on going to the library in order to go on the computer. And they say, we don't have a computer at home. And they had to go to the library. And obviously that would mean those people wouldn't then be on the internet. But then when smartphones come in, suddenly, you need a smartphone basically to live nowadays. And obviously because of that, people go, oh, they're on Twitter more. I genuinely think that's something to do with it. Like the fact that poorer people, who again would have disproportionately more likely have been kind of non-white people, would not have necessarily had as much access to the internet before. And therefore, once they get smartphones and then they can just tweet all the time and have their Twitter accounts, suddenly black Twitter becomes a thing, and that possibly has a shift. That's my modest theory. At least for part of the changes.
I think obviously what you're saying again is like, I think people who
it's only one part of it, of course.
There is obviously a backlash. So people who lost the culture war now have more hardened views.
Yeah, of course.
That we can talk about that next with Gamergate and things like that. But yeah, I think ultimately it has been a decade where like people have just generally changed their opinions on a lot of stuff. There has, there's so many phrases get thrown around involving political correctness and so forth. But
shut up, you NPC.
But again, I think most of the time it's just people just not being more thoughtful, I guess. That's what I'd say. And I think the internet has done a lot of bad things, yes, definitely. But I think one of the good things is it has given people access to new information, access to new ideas. Some of those ideas are bad, admittedly, but I think most of the ideas, I'd say, hopefully, are good. I mean, maybe I'm just being too optimistic, but that's the only reason I can think of this dramatic change.
Some of them, I assume, are good ideas.
Have you seen, weed? How Americans perceive whether cannabis or marijuana, I think, should be legalized in America.
Is that the one where they talk about the monkey experiment?
No, I'm just talking about the rise in the polls of people thinking.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were talking about documentary. No. I was so confused. I haven't seen any polls.
Just
about
marijuana. The legalization of marijuana, the support for the legalization of marijuana in America has just risen so substantially over the years, and I think.
Well, obviously, America has a really stupid system with their drug stuff.
Yeah, but I think again, like, why is that? Why has there been such a rise in? Again, it's not a social issue. Really, it's just again, it's like you and I would say, well, it's stupid that marijuana is banned. It's
yeah. I think it might just be a matter of exposure.
Yeah, exactly, exposure. Like people are have new information about marijuana and people talking to other people about marijuana, and it's like it's not that bad. Yeah. It's really that, and so people getting out.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like obviously the whole marijuana's fantastic argument doesn't quite hold water.
It's not fantastic.
It's no worse. Yeah, it's no worse than say alcohol. I mean, alcohols and cigarettes. So, that's the thing. And I think that's kind of what's changed in the public consciousness. Like, people have realized, hey, some people sit around outside and, smoke cigarettes. And that's not very good for them. But they do it because they're allowed to. Some people get absolutely drunk until they throw up. And that's not good for a variety of reasons. But, they're allowed to. And it doesn't really, it's not the end of the world that they can. And you know what? Some people go into their room or wherever else or go into their car and they smoke some weed. And, that...
Yeah.
Is not, that is their right to do it. And obviously, and the thing is, I think the more people have realized, it's completely different to some guy smoking on a crack pipe or somebody shooting up heroin or somebody doing coke. Obviously those have known very serious.
Yeah, I think
effects.
Overall that right there, marijuana, that is an example of something which it's not a social issue, but it is connected to the culture war. Because I think you would have obviously, hippies smoking weed and all that, and the demonization of that particular group that happened in America in the 60s and 70s, and in the UK to some extent as well. And all of a sudden now, everybody supports the legalization of weed. How did this happen? And so again, I think that's another example of the culture war being won by people who are socially liberal. I do really think this is, again, it's an important thing. And I do, the internet has to have played a role. And maybe Obama, like I said, maybe I'm giving him too much credit. But I do remember when he was elected, it was an incredible moment, which sadly, each day since has seemed even less incredible than that moment.
Oh, by the way, just on the subject of weed, did you see the Gavin and Stacey Christmas special?
No, I didn't. No.
I don't like Gavin and Stacey, but my grandparents will watch it. And one thing actually that's worth bringing up is that one of the jokes in the episode was that one of the wives was annoyed or angry, really furious with her husband, and she goes, to tell her friends about it, and why are you so angry? And she goes, I saw him smoking weed, and they laugh at her, and literally the joke is she's bothered by her husband smoking weed. How silly is that to be bothered by? And my grandparents are still laughing at it. They're like, imagine being bothered by. And I was thinking, so that's another example.
Do you think 10 years ago that joke would have landed?
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, see, I don't think so. Yeah, I think literally the joke now is, well, obviously, smoking weed is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so I think we've talked about the culture war and how things have changed, and how it again has been lost by conservatives. But as you point out, there is always going to be more issues that crop up time and time again.
But let's look at where this all began, Luke.
And then we knew culture wars, yes. But obviously, we're going to talk about internet culture now. And I said the internet it's done, I think, good things at opening people's mind to certain things, but also that's been downsides to the internet. Shall we talk about Gamergate first?
The internet was a mistake. Yeah, let's talk about Gamergate. Yeah. Okay, so Gamergate, it was, obviously, what Gamergate was is so interesting and so many levels, and it's I hope it is something people just remember, because it's kind of crazy how it happened. Basically, ethics in video game journalism. It's so funny. Obviously, the first thing you established is it wasn't about ethics in video game journalism. It was about the fact that there was a backlash to women being involved in media criticism of games, which is kind of ironic in a way, because there was this whole thing happening where it was I remember seeing a lot of people saying, why aren't video games considered art in the same way that films are considered art. Like I saw that being a big thing, especially in the wake of like Grand Theft Auto 4 being released, which of course had a fantastic story and stuff like that. People saying, how can this not be considered art? And then feminists came along and they were like, okay, let's do some art criticism of this. And all the white men were like, no, not like that. And that's it basically. I mean, that's the thing. Like you can pretty much sum up by saying feminists did media criticism of art, and the people who enjoyed that art got angry about it. And yeah, I mean, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I mean, I don't really know that much, but I know, again, that is
But like maybe where it kind of evolved from there.
Well, yeah, obviously where it evolved from there was a resentment towards women among these people who were involved in Gamergate. And it's incredible because I remember at the time I had no idea what Gamergate was. And I think, again, the reason why I've learned about it is because of the internet, so maybe let's say, hey, the internet's good because I know about this stuff. I know about this phenomenon, but again, it wouldn't have existed if the internet wasn't so proliferate in the first place. But yeah, again, it evolves then from video game, what was it, ethics in journalism or in video game journalism?
Yeah.
Somehow evolves into that too. Okay, well, now there's a bunch of these people who don't like women who now can coalesce, and then obviously that springs out into more than just anti-women. It expands into the alt-right, as it is called.
Yeah. Well,
go on.
I was going to say the other thing that's interesting to me is the broader thing before Gamergate, which I think actually was the rise of. Well, see, the one thing that really actually I think began before Gamergate, which I think is important, is, and this is something which we probably could have mentioned if we were being smart, and we haven't really written it down, but I think it's worth bringing up, the rise of atheism on the internet and the split of atheism over progressivism. So I don't know how much you know about this, but basically, of course, in the 2010s, early 2010s, obviously, 2010s was a stupid thing to say, in the early 2010s, and slightly before that, a lot of huge atheist channels rose up. Because, of course, you've got New Atheism, which obviously began with the God Delusion in 2005. Yes. And nothing really happened. And then, of course, suddenly loads of people went on the internet. And this was in the wake of George Bush. And there were a huge number of people who'd been raised by these kind of evangelical parents. And, like, in America, at that point, it was not acceptable to be an atheist. Like, George Bush was considered this great guy because he was like, oh, I talk to God, So it was, like, really, even like that recently, in America, not okay to be an atheist. So suddenly, loads of people went online and they could say, hey, I'm an atheist. And loads of people said, yeah, me too. And this huge online community emerged from atheism. And then you got loads of YouTube channels, like, for example, The Amazing Atheist, etc., who started saying, hey, and the big three were the Cult of Dusky, Thunderfoot, The Amazing Atheist. And they came on, they're like, hey, we're atheists and we're going to explain why atheism is great and all that kind of stuff. And then what happened was these other people came along who were PZ Myers was one of the guys, and he was like the member of the Atheist Alliance or something. And he introduced something he called Atheism Plus. And he said, we're atheists, but also if we stand for social justice. So he said, we're atheists plus we're feminists. We're atheists plus we are anti-racist, blah, blah, blah. And obviously lots of the big name personalities on YouTube who also all happen to be white men suddenly went, no, shut up, that's stupid. And Thunderfoot made a whole series of videos where he was basically saying, like, they accuse me of being sexist, and these people are ruining everything because they're accusing men of harassment just because they're asking women out on dates at these conferences and stuff like that, like making all these videos. The Amazing Atheist made this video like, oh, feminists are stupid. I mean, the religious are stupid, but feminists have all the same arguments, blah, 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 blah. Huge, big thing. And that was, and for me, because I bring this up because I used to not be a feminist. I guess I'd say I was an anti-feminist to an extent, even though it was kind of at the point where I hadn't really thought much about it. But because I was on board with this whole YouTube atheism thing, and then I saw The Amazing Atheist come out and go, hey, men and women are basically equal. If feminism is about equality, why? Like, I find it so stupid. I actually was suckered in by this. But it was like, if feminism is about equality, why is it called feminism? And I was like, yeah, good point. Why shouldn't we focus on both genders issues?
All lives
matter. And I was like, yeah, feminists are stupid. And I literally believe that. But the thing is, I remember at school, like, there was this. We were talking about international relations, and because that was the A level we did, international relations. And one of the theories we did was the feminist theory of international relations. And I remember somebody said, I think it was a guy, said, but is anybody even a feminist anymore? And then this one girl was like, I'm a feminist. And then everybody, including all the women, were like, what? Why? That's weird. Why would you be a feminist? And my sister was like, yeah, why would anyone be a feminist? But what's weird is that now, everybody I know is a feminist. Like, there are people I know who were like even the kind of women who were sort of, I guess, woke and like would be the types to go to university and like the types to study a social studies degree at university or like a social science degree at university who you think would become card-carrying progressives, and probably are card-carrying progressive now, they were like anti-feminist in the early 2010s. So that's interesting. So I think it's important to bear in mind before we get into the kind of next bit, is that when Gamergate arose, it arose from a culture where I think a huge number of people were like, oh yeah, why would you need feminism? Everything's fine. Even like women I know were like,
yeah, I guess.
So I don't know if does that line up with your experience?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, same thing. I'd imagine obviously why these people have changed now, and why you now would consider yourself a feminist is probably because of the internet.
Because I wanted to get pussy.
Because of the internet? Would you say that was the reason?
Yeah, but I mean, obviously the weird thing is though that the first, of course, the original rise of the anti-feminism came from the internet, and I guess really it's interesting to think about what kind of changed. And I think the main thing that changed is obviously, I mean, we've already spoken about kind of the rise things there, but I think on the YouTube side, at first it was sort of the channels which were anti-feminist had generally quite bad production values, and I think you then got to see channels like H-Bomber Guy and of course ContraPoints and Sean, and those were channels which had good production quality and also a humour and a personality which they then added to these political messages. Whereas I remember a period when I first got involved in YouTube when literally you had these Gamergate guys and then you just had these faceless channels who would just mindlessly respond. It's what I used to do. Mindlessly respond, like, you know, someone would make an argument, you play the argument, and then you say, actually, this is wrong because according to Simone de Beauvoir, blah, blah, blah. And everyone was like, okay, that's boring. And then you got ContraPoints, things like that, who come along and go, hello, ladies, I'm going to show you why this fascist is stupid. And everyone was like on board with that. And then obviously you got things like Lindsay Ellis, who sort of introduced, hey, I'm doing media criticism, but from a feminist perspective, but I'm going to kind of not be open. Like I'm not going to put my feminism at the forefront. So I think that kind of caused maybe the shift. Like it was like people suddenly realized, oh yeah, feminism, when you just see feminism as like a part of just understanding the world around you, you can't really disagree with it. Like that's maybe my theory. So if you say, hey, I'm a feminist, and you just say like, that's all your main thing, you just say I'm a feminist, then people go, oh, feminist. But if you go, hey, you know, I noticed that this media is really crap because it portrays women this way. Also, by the way, maybe I'm a feminist. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's part of the cultural shift, which you talked about. It's like people now are like, oh yeah, it's just feminism is just part of one thing. So now they are, like, as you would say before, card-carrying progressives. I do think what's interesting about all that atheism stuff that you talked about, just to go back to that and how that sprung up, with Richard Dawkins, the God Delusion and stuff. I remember it being referenced in like a Family Guy episode, and obviously Brian had the God Delusion, and obviously nowadays he would not agree with what Richard Dawkins is saying. Like 15 years later. But yeah, I think there was, again, this view. There's, of course, in America, things were just dominated by evangelical Christians in the 2000s. And I think I have heard many people, and obviously I didn't really know what was going on back then, saying, you don't know how bad it was in the 2000s, man. How, like, stupid people were, just the fucking God stuff. And then after, there was a backlash.
Yeah, I hate when people fuck God.
There was a backlash that rose out of it, which was the smart, logical people who were atheists who...
Well, I'm an atheist.
Yeah, exactly. That base their beliefs on reason and intelligence and thought and all of that. Complete opposite to what happened back then in the mid-2000s. And I think, by the way, that's how you got a show like The Big Bang Theory. I think that could be obviously the most popular TV show of this decade. Not in terms of just pure numbers of people watching, I think. I think that comes from a backlash of, oh, let's do a show about smart people because, you know, smart people are now the kind of the backlash to, you know, this evangelical Christian stuff that was going on. And yeah, I think... Yeah.
And by contrast, I mean, you had like in the 2000s to the kind of end of the Bush era, you had shows like Malcolm in the Middle, which was about basically kind of, I mean, really lower working class people who were kind of stupid. I mean, that was the joke. Like, Reese was stupid, Dewey was kind of stupid, Hal was kind of stupid. You got like My Name is Earl, which was literally about like hillbillies in a trailer park, and that ended in like 2008, 2009. So yeah, I think maybe you're right, that basically, because obviously Big Bang Theory started in 2008,
2008,
right? Or was it even later, I think? But so basically, yeah, it was like, oh, you know, in the 2000 to 2008, I was like, stupid people. And then in 2009 onwards, I was like, smart people.
Yeah, this rise of
how far we've come.
Reason and logic and all that. And that then, obviously, but obviously the central theme of that was atheism, like, oh, believing God is stupid. And all that, you know, you've got to trust science, you've got to trust thinking, your logic. And then for that then, obviously you talk about atheism, then it springs up into anti-feminist, you know, racist stuff, but still surrounded with this logic and reason.
Yeah, I think the term that a lot of people use, which I find was quite clever, was scientism.
Yes.
Which was basically kind of the idea of like, while I think there were a variety of times used, I think the simplest way to say it would be that science's axioms were self-justifying, and the idea being, in other words, why would you argue science? Science is the best and only way to learn everything. You've got obviously like Sam Harris saying that science can answer moral questions, and obviously then the logic becomes, well, when feminists come along and say, hey, let's do media criticism with feminism. If your like entire basis for your belief system up until that point has been that science is literally like the only answer to anything you need, from that perspective, the idea of somebody saying, yeah, let's talk about feminism and media criticism, you go, that's pseudoscience and stuff like that. Yeah, like you go, and obviously, yeah, in the case of racism, you can even lead to people say, well, racism is scientific, and obviously that's race realism.
Yeah, and then you got people like Ben Shapiro rising out of this, Stephen Molyneux.
Yes, so yeah, that's a big thing.
Like this stuff about logic and reason and facts about how actually feminism is stupid and America isn't actually racist and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, actually, interesting thing on that note. Actually, the obviously about the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Yes. Basically, the idea, because that's the other thing. Because obviously, Stefan Molyneux started off like his super logical position was. I mean, obviously, Stefan Molyneux was such an idiot. Like his thing was, he was like, I'm bringing philosophy to YouTube, and his philosophy was like, he'd just say compatibilism, more like constupidabilism and stuff like that. But
all those Roman abbeys, like of Roman statues.
Yeah. I remember, he literally said, like, you can't deny objective moral truth, because if you deny objective moral truth, you're saying that it's objectively better that people don't believe in objective moral truth. And that was like his argument against it, but idiot. Anyway, the big thing was, his big argument was like, oh, well, obviously taxation is theft. And he got it by using this kind of stupid reductionist argument of like, well, theft is when you take things without somebody's consent. I don't consent to the government taking my money via taxes, therefore taxation is theft. And then eventually it became like, oh, well, the only way to stop the government taking money is to suppress the people who want the government to take money. And those people are left-wing. Why are those people left-wing? Because of the universities manipulating people. And of course, that's when Ben Shapiro comes in, because his first book he wrote while he was at university was called like How Universities Manipulate the Youth. I can't remember what it was called something like that. And obviously, the university manipulate. Why? Because of the academics. And who are those academics, Luke?
They're Marxist.
Yeah, I was going to say Jews, but yeah, like basically, I mean, obviously, you can say like from that, and obviously, it depends how far you want to go. Obviously, Ben Shapiro doesn't go for the Jew thing, but he
goes for everything
wherever you want to. Yeah, it's a choose your own adventure of like craziness, because you basically start off with like, oh yeah, the white value or like the Western values are under attack. And then the question becomes, why are they under attack? Like who's attacking them? And obviously, you can then throw in whatever you want. You go, oh, it's the gays, it's the transgenders, it's the Jews, it's the Marxists, it's the critical theorists. You can literally, you just do whatever you want. Obviously, you get PragerU, of course, on that.
So
note.
This is what the alt-right journey has been then, I guess. A backlash to God and religion, that leads into atheism, that leads into a thinking of like, oh, science is all that matters, science can answer moral questions. That means rejecting stuff like feminism and racism, which, are just ridiculous, that they're not logical. And that then leads into, people like Shapiro being extremely successful, and people, as you said, like Stefan Molyneux being extremely successful. And then that leads, again, to an all-out culture war concerning American universities, which really was all the rage back in like 2017 about, free speech and all of that shit. Yeah. Those were the days.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And obviously you get the whole like debate. Obviously you get Dave Rubin and things like that. And the big centrism thing, where it's like the people going, well, both sides have things to say, and obviously that's another huge thing. But I mean, there's obviously so much been going on politically. I guess maybe the only thing that can be said is it seems like increasingly these people are being put in the cultural forefront, and that's making them seem more stupid. I think it almost seems like they're becoming less relevant now. I don't really know why, but like I think maybe it's just because I don't know where it's coming from, but it almost seems like you don't really hear about Ben Shapiro and Paul Joseph Watson and Sargon of Akkad anything like as much as you used to. And I genuinely think it's because, one, people have kind of forgotten about them, and two, ironically, and this is my theory, and maybe it's complete nonsense, but I actually think when the left started hating centrists, they actually did the ultimate power play, because at that point the debate didn't become between the right and the left. The debate became between centrists and the left. Like, you look at the political landscape, we'll get into this in a second, but it's like a lot of it's between lefts and centrists. Like, we're almost kind of ignoring Trump right now because we're all focusing on like, hey, and I actually think that's good because I mean, obviously you shouldn't just ignore, obviously, like there are examples where it's good and bad, but I think from a cultural context, the fact that in many ways, in a lot of aspects of society, of course, not universally, the debate is no longer, hey, should we abolish gay marriage and abolish abortion?
When I'm talking about economic stuff,
reject feminism. We should instead be like, hey, should we platform these people or not? And like ultimately, we're basically everyone's debating whether or not the right wing people should be allowed to speak. So that's a pretty shitty position for them to be in, and they deserve it. Like I like the idea that Ben Shapiro, as he's ranting on his show, we people, the progressives, are arguing amongst themselves about whether or not he should even be allowed to talk. Because there we go, that just shows how irrelevant.
Yeah, I think you brought up something like that, the left and the centre, and how these people have become more irrelevant. I do think it is because of economic factors that have been talked about more. Particularly someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez come to the forefront of our culture.
Well, don't mention AOC around Ben Shapiro.
Yeah. But her main thing really isn't about identity politics and feminism, although she does tweet about that stuff. It's literally about tax the billionaires, stop them being so wealthy, and then it puts these people on the back foot because they then have to defend the status quo. They have to defend the billionaires having all this money, and inherently to these people who they're speaking to, who aren't that wealthy, who are lonely white males, generally, it's like, well, wait, why is this the case? Why are we defending like people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos? Why is that happening? Yeah. So that's why I think they have become less relevant since like 2017, and will hopefully if someone like Bernie Sanders would win the presidency, that they'll become less relevant again and again and again. That's
it'll be interesting to see, of course.
That's the hope. Yeah.
Who knows? It hangs in the balance, but we'll see how things work out. I mean, tell you what, Luke. Less than a year until we can find out what state America is going to be in. And that will be a big thing. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I will say this, even in 2016, when people were talking about Trump versus Hillary, the one thing I always said is like, even though I hate Hillary, I enthusiastically want her to beat Trump. Like, I wasn't even one of those people who was like, oh, I don't really care. I enthusiastically want her to win because I was like, if she doesn't win, and if Trump wins, that will have a ripple effect on the wider cultural landscape. And like the way that people view politics. And I think to an extent it definitely has, although you could make an argument, hopefully, that maybe in a way things will, if Bernie actually does win the nomination this time around, and maybe we can say, oh, you know what, it's fine. At least it had a benefit at the end, because obviously we could say that with Hillary we just get, it would be delaying the inevitable problem where the centrist Democrats.
I just want to point out, obviously we're British and we're talking a lot about American stuff to do with the presidency, and we just have our own election. It's because literally America just set everything when it comes to internet culture. It does, like, obviously you got like 5 times, maybe even 6 times more people, probably 5 times more people living in America than living in the UK. So all this internet culture, all this stuff about social politics and feminism and racism, it all stems from the United States first and then makes its way to the UK after. Yeah,
and also, I mean, it's worth noting that many British people go over to the UK to kind of obviously get Milo Yiannopoulos and Paul Joseph Watson, who of course worked for InfoWars. So I think there's obviously a transatlantic nature. And of course you get the whole Farage thing. I mean, I think Farage, now he's won Brexit, a lot of people are saying he's probably going to head on over to America to almost just be like a hero for the Republicans or something. Like, I don't know, basically he's going to like just become a talking head in America, which, I mean, all power to him, I guess. Just do what you've got to do. Anyway, but with all of this said, while obviously we've been kind of talking somewhat even-handedly about both sides, it's worth noting that there is one big way that the left has made a huge comeback recently. Well, you might say the left. You might say the loony left. And that is, of course, with the rise of cancel culture. So, I mean, for me, the interesting thing about cancel culture is that the first example I can think of it happening was with Cancel Colbert. Now, do you know about that? Or do you remember it?
No, I don't.
Okay, so the Cancel Colbert, I think it was in 2014, which is weird because that seems very early. It might have been 2015. Basically, it was, the whole debate about the Washington Redskins being called the Washington Redskins. Yes. Some guy made the guy who owned the
Dan
Washington
Schneider,
Redskins said, yeah, that's probably it. Why not? Said, we've established the Washington Redskins Foundation for Native American, cultural advancement, something like that. And Stephen Colbert, working, because obviously he had the satirical Colbert Show, and this was when he was running that, made a joke. He said, I approve of this decision to have the Washington Redskins cultural advancement for Native Americans, and that's why I've established the Ching Chong Foundation for sensitivity to Asian people. Now, that's a pretty obvious satirical joke.
Yes.
And this woman called Seol Park basically started a hashtag called Cancel Colbert, and the entire world basically laughed at her because they said, that's stupid, it's a joke, whatever. And that's interesting, mostly because it was another one of these examples where the kind of right-wing talking heads like Thunderfoot and Sargon and all that kind of stuff tried to paint it as like, look what the left are trying to do. They're trying to cancel Colbert because he made a satirical joke. Meanwhile, literally the entire left was saying, actually, we don't agree with this woman. It was obviously a joke. Colbert was
well, it
making
matters
fun
who
of right-wing.
Colbert, and there are people like that who just don't get the joke at all, and they're mainly, that's the thing, they say far left, that's what people say, these far left people. It's mainly people who are kind of like liberals. Yeah, who kind of
exactly. That is true.
are so fucking stupid and airheaded. They don't get who, like some Colbert, he's making a joke there about how racially insensitive Dan Snyder is and how fucking stupid he is with his red skin. What was it again?
Again, I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's called something like the Redskin Center for Cultural Advancement.
It matters who you're making the joke
exactly,
out of. And then here's the thing. There are people like you mentioned, Sargon of Akkad, who, again, they point to the left because actually they're on the right, even though they wouldn't say so. They're on the right to try and convince people who are gullible, that the left-wing people are the ones who are stealing the fun out of comedy. And so that's a big thing for them, stealing the fun out of comedy, and then that sends these gullible people down a path all the way to, well, you know what? Actually, I'm starting to believe race science now. That's the path and they hook them with the. Well, look at they're trying to cancel Stephen Colbert. How ridiculous is that? And it's the left.
That's true though, because it genuinely seems like, I mean, in my experience with looking at any right-wing argument, the right-wing arguments are always about, look at this one example of a crazy person, or look at this one example of like a crazy decision. Like, you know, like, oh look, the government decided to fund completely the construction of a mosque in Birmingham. Well, why are they funding the construction of a mosque when there's people in Birmingham who are starving? Like something like that. Like that would be the story. And it's like, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but these people, they don't look at the holistic thing. They just say, look at this one person, look at this one issue. How stupid is this? And then obviously the problem is then people get the whole package with the brief sensation of being like, haha, yeah, I'm smarter than those people, which is stupid because if you're actually on the left, you can laugh at those people and also still be right. But
yeah, I think, overall with this cancel culture thing, cancel culture.
Yeah, because I was going to say, obviously, that's kind of the thing that I didn't actually get around to. So obviously, it's interesting to me that cancel culture has then started, and of course, it's interesting that it does have these, because that's the first example, and it literally was hashtagging, hashtag cancel Colbert. You can actually look for it on Twitter if you want to find it. It was like,
it doesn't exist. That's what the point I want to make. Cancel culture does not exist. Like, people, nobody gets cancelled. I mean, Ricky Gervais has said some really transphobic stuff, and he's selling out tours around the world. Like, it does not.
Yeah, there was like cancel. Was there a cancel Chappelle? Was that like a thing? I'm sure
it was. And again, Chappelle made a just really boring joke about, oh, men are women. How hilarious is that? He did like the exact same one like in his previous comedy special. And is David Chappelle getting cancelled? No, he wasn't. He literally just appeared on SNL like a couple of weeks ago and got a huge round of applause. So again, it doesn't exist. Yeah. But you notice again with Chappelle. There was a load of just right-wing people, like you mentioned, Sargon of Akkad, probably Stephen Crowder as well, that kind of people saying, look what the left's trying to do to cancel Chappelle. And again, it didn't happen at all. There has been people, quote-unquote, cancelled, the likes of Louis C.K.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, that's the thing, like the people who, because I was going to bring up Louis C.K.
Stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, Louis C.K., I mean, he was probably the tamest of the people. Well, basically,
did he masturbate?
As far as I know, there are two things he did which you could say are bad. The first one is that he asked people if he could masturbate in front of them. But and the problem there, as far as I know, I think I'm right in saying this, he never masturbated in front of somebody without their consent. However, the criticism is that it is automatically harassing because the people he was asking were people who were under his employ. Mm-hmm. So in that context, but the other thing he did, which was against somebody's consent, I think I'm right in saying this, was he masturbated while on the phone with a woman and she was not aware of that. So those are the two things. Again, like I say, I mean, it's not, I would say in the grand scheme of things, it's not the most horrendous. I mean, you compare it to like Harvey Weinstein and things like that.
Okay.
But obviously, it's actually like a physical thing he did. You can make an, I mean, it did probably make the women involved uncomfortable. I'm sure, almost certain that there were women who agreed to this because they felt like Louis C.K. had the power in that situation, and obviously that's a problem. But basically, the main point being that most of the people who have been cancelled, it's more to do with the Me Too movement. And obviously that's a different thing. The whole cancel thing, in terms of like somebody says something and it's like, oh, I hate them. No, not really. I think you could make an argument. Okay, so this is the one thing I think is very relevant. ContraPoints is no longer on Twitter. Well, she is on Twitter now, but she no longer uses the Twitter account. She went off of Twitter. And the reason for that is that her and also her girlfriend, partner, Theron, I think is their name, both made comments essentially to the effect of people who claim to be transgender but don't make an active effort to express as the gender that they claim to identify as. So things like doing makeup. They said that person is essentially not really a trans person. And that they're just trying to appropriate transgender spaces. So basically, if I, for example, like obviously I'm a man, and if I said I'm a woman, and then I made no active effort to express as a woman by assigning certain female signifiers to me, then they would say, oh, you're just appropriating transgender culture, you're not really transgender. Theron, I think that's their name, said that, and then ContraPoints agreed, and I think retweeted some stuff and things like that. And then ContraPoints got totally dragged by progressive Twitter. Anthony Fantano was like, ContraPoints, she's awful. She really dropped the ball on this one. Everybody hated her. And then she shut down her Twitter account. Loads of right-wing personalities said, the left's eating itself, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's an interesting example, just because, and that's the main example I can think of when like the whole cancel thing was big. Because most of the time, the cancel thing has mostly just been, oh, look, some celebrity said something. Oh, let's all just gang up on them because we hate them. Whereas with the cancel Contra thing, I don't think anybody actually said cancel ContraPoints, but basically everyone said, oh, ContraPoints said that basically, I mean, simplest way you could say it is that she basically said non-gender conforming transgender people are not legitimate. And everyone went, that's bad. You shouldn't say that. And it was a big controversy over it. And I think that's just an interesting one because it was actually an example of somebody who was a part of the left-wing sphere getting caught up in something where I think what Contra was trying to say may have been taken out of context. I don't know. I think that would be an example of where you can make an argument there was a legitimate criticism of cancel culture because something which probably could have been resolved by saying, well, what did you mean when you said that? Was instead turned into, oh, you hate all transgender people who are in any way non-conforming, blah, blah, blah. You know, you think all transgender women must wear makeup and have their hair done, like, basically.
So you made a really long point there, Michael. But I think the point you're making is, well, here's my experience as well. Like, I say cancel culture doesn't exist, but when it does exist, it affects people who are left-wing. I'd say,
yes, that
is the case. That is...
Absolutely.
That is the case. And I think we were talking about the Me Too movement as well, about how that whole cancel culture thing sprung out of it. Again, like, it's funny to watch how the term morphed from basically calling out sexual predators like Harvey Weinstein, and Kevin Spacey as well, to then now it's about calling a celebrity, calling out a celebrity when they made a joke you didn't like. And that is deliberate by people we mentioned before, like Stephen Crowder, Sargon of Akkad, all these kind of people who want to try and make like the whole thing, like the whole Me Too movement and ridiculous,
seem illegitimate,
illegitimate and ridiculous. Group that all together and say, well, look how stupid cancel culture is. And obviously that is there.
Yeah, I think the final point I want to say on that actually is, I think, and this is an important thing to everyone to bear in mind, like the whole claim about, the left's eating itself, because you say, like, most of the people that get called out on this, they are left-wing people, which I actually think is something I'm okay with, because the people say the left is eating itself. Here's the thing, and this is what right-wingers don't seem to be able to understand. The left has always been, or maybe not always been, but is certainly more so, especially with the rise of third-wave feminism, self-critical. Like, basically, like, acknowledging that you can have personal biases where you may have been wrong about something, that you can have really deeply held beliefs, and actually you can admit, those beliefs I had were based entirely on completely ignoring this underprivileged group, and that was on me for not, paying attention to them, not listening to them. And that's a big thing that the left is about, and it's a good thing the left is about that. So ultimately, that's the funny thing that the right are basically saying. And of course, you can make the argument that obviously the right do well in some political context because they all fall in line behind one guy, whereas the left don't. But ultimately, from a purely principled standpoint, ignoring the kind of political practicality of it, it's good that the left tends to say, hey, that thing you did just then, that wasn't okay. And obviously sometimes the left goes overboard because of just the way that Twitter works. It's not really to do with the left, it's to do with Twitter, but
No, I think, but not being incredibly dogmatic, I think, does help in that perspective. But yeah, I think overall, obviously, that is the internet culture. I mean, the thing is, we want to talk about culture, but I think everything from this decade that involves culture does kind of come from the internet. does kind of come from these places. Certainly, considering our generation. I remember, did I reference Knives Out earlier in the movie? Earlier in this talk as well.
Yes, you did.
And there was like stuff in that involving the younger generation calling each other like SJW snowflakes and Nazis and stuff. And if that's in like a Hollywood movie directed by Rian Johnson, you can tell it has made an impact. Yeah,
we love Rian Johnson.
We absolutely do. We love it. So yeah, I think that right there. I think that's what we have to acknowledge it. It's like fucking Gamergate, Ben Shapiro, cancel culture, all of this stuff which our generation is exposed to. Like that shapes minds, that shapes opinions, that shapes beliefs, and that drives a lot of the culture. And it shouldn't, maybe it shouldn't really, but it really does. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in 2020. Whether this stuff will still exist, who knows? I think like we talked about before, it really does matter who becomes president in the United States in 2020. If someone like Bernie wins, and that changes kind of everything. Now it's not really about racism and feminism, even though that will be important. Obviously, it will shift to talk about billionaires and how much money you've got and taxes and all that, which I think is the right thing to do. I think that's how the internet now those are the issues the internet will be debating instead of racism and feminism. In the 2020s, if somebody like Bernie Sanders were to win. But yeah, who knows?
You mean when somebody like Bernie Sanders wins?
I do want to talk about sports now, Michael. Yeah,
that's fine. We can talk about sports
involved
now.
In culture again. Well,
I'll just go to sleep. I need a power nap.
There's nothing remarkable about sports in this decade apart from it happened. Like music, it happened. Like Drake was big. Fucking, I don't know what other examples of just stuff that happened, Michael.
Yeah, something that Hurricane Harvey.
Oh, I mean, I'm still talking about broad things like NCT.
Eminem released lots of bad albums.
Well, yeah, it's just like music just happened. Yeah. I don't know. Was there a defining trend in music in this decade? Maybe in the UK it was grime music or drill music, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
but there's nothing really else. And again, in sports, similar thing. There, you could argue in football, like tiki-taka passing. Watch Spain really dominated when that Pep Guardiola with his Barcelona side. That led everyone to press more, have more possession, etc., stuff like that. But I just want to say, I think overall, just looking at sports in a whole, I think this decade we've had a really big or really nice selection of really athletes who have been at the top of their game in this sport. That's probably the best way to say it. I think you look at basketball, LeBron James, football, Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, in my opinion, the two best players to ever play the game of football who have just dominated this decade, around the same age, have now starting to tail off in 2019. Tennis, Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal. Just an incredible selection of incredible tennis players. So again, they might be the best 3 tennis players of all time, just all in one decade, which is quite incredible. Federer obviously started his dominance before the start of this decade, but yeah. Then we also look at stuff like American football with Tom Brady. Formula 1, my favourite sport, Lewis Hamilton. Done incredibly well this decade again. Probably the second greatest driver of all time, and maybe the greatest once he finishes his career. I'm hoping for that. Anyway, so yeah. I just think in sport this decade, we've had in a lot of really popular sports, we've had a lot of like once in a lifetime athletes at the top of their game. And yeah, I don't remember the same in the mid 2000s, just in the 2000s. I really don't remember the same sort of talent in all those sports I've mentioned. Obviously, there's always going to be talented people in sports, but not to the extent that has happened this decade. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
No, I agree. Yeah, basically, yeah, it does seem like talent has been pretty high. Oh, we didn't mention the fact it was coming home, and then it wasn't.
It was.
That's important.
It was coming home. Yeah. Nah, and then it failed.
Yeah, I miss when it was coming home.
Those were the days when it was coming home.
Yeah, it was much better than when it wasn't coming home. Am I right, ladies?
Okay, so I think we should move on to politics now.
Yes, politics, more like boring shit.
So we kind of talked, obviously, about culture in the last one, and now, again, so I guess the culture we talked about was really to do with, obviously, social liberals, social conservatives, and battling it out online and how that debate was shaped, but let's just talk strictly economic stuff, I think, for politics, because I think that has been the most important thing of this decade. And it all started, again, I mentioned before, with how movies had to be safe and not have any risks because of the 2008 financial crisis. I think again, you can't talk about politics without the 2008 financial crisis and the effect that had.
Just watch me.
Okay, try, Michael.
So basically, I think that it would be good if we had everybody just cuddle ducks more, because ducks are cute. That's my political position.
Now, I think, firstly, what I read an article earlier, Michael. It was about Stephen Colbert, who we mentioned previously, and Jon Stewart.
Oh yeah.
And how at the start of the decade,
yes,
they held a rally which was to restore sanity to politics, I think it was. And the title of the article was "The Utter Failure of Liberalism in This Decade." And I think that has been the political legacy of this decade, like how liberalism has just been completely and utterly destroyed. I'm not talking about like social liberalism, because obviously we mentioned people now more socially liberal than they were. I'm talking about the economic, like liberalism, neoliberalism, if you would, that phrase.
I would.
Again, I think what we've seen is just a failure of neoliberalism, and that obviously that the 2008 financial crisis was that. It was basically, well, don't worry, deregulation is fine. Rich people can get as rich as they want. Let's not worry too much about wealth inequality. And then eventually we have the crash, and then none of those issues are fixed, and people are now poorer. And then you have just somebody like Trump come along. You have Brexit happen. You have somebody, again, on the left-hand side, which somebody I support, but Bernie Sanders.
Pass the duchy on the left-hand side.
Somebody like Bernie Sanders, who, again, it could be the president of the United States next year, which, again, shows how badly neoliberalism has failed. If you have...
Yeah, I mean, tell you what, when I think of failure, I think of Bernie Sanders.
Well, that's what I'm... Like, 20 years ago, Bernie Sanders wouldn't have a chance to become president. But now, because of the failure of this ideology, which really, what was it? It started in, like, 1980, really. That's when it got going. 1990s, 2000s, now we're here in 2019, still the dominant economic system in the Western world. And it has sprung up all sort of political surprises across the world. And so do you want to get on to the biggest surprise of the decade?
The Obozo?
No.
Oh, no, sorry. I mean, we've already spoken about him. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So, I get what you're saying. I just wanted to say, actually, about, like, kind of neoliberalism and, like, its failure more specifically, because I do think that Obama is a part of it. I mean, we spoke before about, like, in a different episode about how Obama is went from, like, the audacity of hope and, like, yes, we can, to basically...
the audacity of no.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And the other thing that obviously we got with him was he was... I think neoliberalism is sort of just believed that by having an idea, they could do something. I think that's kind of the problem with neoliberalism. It's almost like the exact opposite of what you'd think neoliberalism would be, which is that neoliberalism seems to be, it's better to have an idea than it is to have a policy. Like, and the best example I think of is the fact that Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize because, and I think literally the reason he won was because of his commitment to peace in the Middle East. And he won that. The worst thing about it is I don't think this is even relevant to this decade, because I think he won that in 2009.
He did, yes.
Yeah, and because he hadn't done anything, but he'd said, I'm going to try and make sure that there is peace in the Middle East. And then what do you get under Obama? You got ISIS. You got, like, I mean, it's so funny. It's so hilarious. You got, like, the Saudi war crimes in Yemen. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize because he said, you know what? I think that peace in the Middle East would be just lovely. And, like, that's the problem.
That is the neoliberal ethos.
Like,
you are completely right.
That's what neoliberals do. Neoliberals are the kind of people who would, like, they'd give Joseph Stalin a prize for his commitment to there being food in Ukraine.
No, that's
my analogy.
I think probably a better example, maybe. Well, it's certainly more relevant. Justin Trudeau, 2019, he's at the climate change rally saying, "Yeah, we got to stop climate change. Green energy and all of that." While he's approving like oil pipelines in the western part of Canada, and it is literally like, wait, you have the ability to stop this. Yeah. You can stand up on stage and say lovely flowery language about wouldn't it be great if the world was green, and that's what we're striving to, but at the same time you're not actually enacting any policies to change that. And because and that's the thing. The same with Obama. That's the thing. Neoliberalism, I think, failed, and why Obama was so successful with it, especially in 2012, and why he's still popular, is because he's an incredibly charismatic guy. Like, it's neoliberalism of this failed ideology, but you slap the Obama coat of paint on it, everybody likes Obama. He's very witty, he's very smart, charismatic, then all of a sudden it doesn't look like a shit car. But if you slap a coat of Hillary Clinton paint on it, it looks like what it is. It looks very uninspiring, very drab.
And then what would happen?
What would happen after that? Like, I guess the same thing with Justin Trudeau. He's very charismatic, he's good looking. You slap a neoliberalism car with Justin Trudeau, well, it doesn't look too bad, does it? But yeah, someone like Hillary Clinton, who doesn't have the charisma, doesn't have the ability to just...
Not look evil.
Sorry, not look evil.
Not look evil.
Doesn't have the personality, then that model, those ideas fail, as we saw in 2016 with Trump. Well, she did get almost 3 million more votes than Trump, but she should have got...
I mean, that's the kind of evidence that it's not
I know.
lost, that at least people seem to understand that Trump was shit.
Yeah, I know, but still, she should have, fucking Donald Trump, man, as president, she should have absolutely rinsed him. Anyone should have absolutely rinsed him. And that's why you said in your prediction video, which I watched, anyone's going to beat Trump in 2020 because he's so shit. No candidate...
Oh, you did watch that. That makes me really happy, Luke. I'm glad to see that you
I know, no candidate can be as bad as Hillary Clinton. It's just impossible. But yeah, still, I think ultimately we have to talk about Trump because I think that's the thing many people will look back at in this decade of 2020s. What was the most important thing that happened? What was the thing that defined the decade? Well, it's fucking Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. Something that literally in 2015 when he started his campaign was absolutely laughable. Something that's been laughable throughout his whole life. Something that which, if you said that to anybody before 2016, they would have just...
They'd call you a tomfool, wouldn't they?
And it happened. And yeah, it is... You just listen to him speak, man. That's the thing I don't get about you. Just listen to him speak just about anything. You think, what a fucking moron. And he's president.
Yeah.
But again, that's the failure of neoliberalism. People were so desperate for something different that they picked a guy who pointed out all the problems with neoliberalism. And yes, he's a racist as well. That plays a part, obviously. But yeah, I think... Look, me, man, if your political ideology is that broken that someone like Donald Trump can be president, you should probably not have that political ideology. I think that would be my takeaway from 2016, is why I have probably become more left-wing since 2016, because I've just seen the failure of that ideology.
Yeah.
And it has become...
It sure is hard to be a centrist neoliberal when Trump won, but somebody's got to do it.
So yeah, that's just my takeaway from the political side of things. What do you think?
No, yeah, I mean, I think basically you're right. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be the biggest thing, which says a lot. I mean, that's the thing. I think part of it is it has become about personalities, but it's become about personalities in the weirdest way with Donald Trump, because the whole thing with Donald Trump is that he completely went against... I think it shows the mistrust of government, because I think the reason Trump won is because he wasn't charismatic, and because he literally dressed like trash. He dressed just awfully. He had terrible hair. The thing about that, I think, is that people have reached a point now where they associate intelligent speaking with the political class. They associate fancy, tailored suits with the political class. They associate, nice, proper barber cut haircuts with the political class. And they associate the political class with lies and with insincerity and with corruption. And part of that does come from neoliberalism. That basically, in other words... you see Obama say, I think it would be very good. I don't know why he sounds like that, but I think it would be very good if we got some bloody peace in the Middle East. And everyone went, yeah, good. Oh, nice suit, buddy. Ah, great. Here's a reward. Here's your participation trophy, oh bozo.
All that
everyone said, that's stuff. Lame. Yeah, exactly. And then Donald Trump comes in and says, let me tell you folks, I think
these
we
actions
should
are just
build a wall.
Absolutely.
I know, I love it. Let me tell you folks, I think we should build a wall. I think we should make Mexico pay for it. Let me tell you, look at what happened in these countries with the terrorism. It's not good, folks. I know a thing or two about terrorism.
Yeah, well,
I'm an expert on the nuclear energies. You ever heard of that? And everyone goes, oh, he's a fucking idiot. There's no way he's got anything to do with the political class. I want to vote for him. That's
exactly. It's like this guy is completely different to what I've seen before, and he is pointing out all the problems that I have in my life and have impacted society in America, and part of that, obviously, you could say, well, it's down to propaganda, some of it, but some of it is dead on. I think the greatest failure of the political culture, and you could say more kind of specifically neoliberalism, is that it has created a situation where people prefer what is worse solely because it is different. Yeah, well, maybe they don't know it's
people
worse.
Are like, oh, I like that because it's worse, and therefore... it's different. That's my theory.
Yeah,
it's true.
I mean, I don't think they perhaps know.
No, they probably don't consciously know it's worse,
But I think, generally with Trump, it is just Like you said before, he's completely different. And that's why Bernie Sanders is such an advantage in 2020, because people say, well, he's not a Democrat. The voters are going to be like, oh, he's not a Democrat? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, let me hear what this guy has to say then. I genuinely think that's the case.
Yeah. We call them, by the way, sorry, on this podcast, we call them demon rats.
Demon rats, I do apologise, demon rats. Yeah. Trump comes in literally not associated with a political party, really. He represents the Republicans, but he's obviously very far from a traditional Republican. Comes in, says a load of shit, which, and points out the failures of neoliberalism. His whole campaign, Make America Great Again. So, America, God, it was doing so badly in 2016 and still is, which is one of the reasons why he's probably not going to win re-election. In terms of, like, you just look at rural areas in America, the suicide rates of people there, and just obviously the massive wealth inequality. 40% of Americans, I think, if they had a medical issue, they might go into bankruptcy. Just absolutely stunning statistics. And a guy who's coming in saying, oh yeah, America needs to, it's shit, basically. I'll make it good again. Oh my God, what an appeal. And neoliberalism's like, no, everything's fine. Keep this baby going. Everything's going to be okay in the end. Yeah, it absolutely failed. And I think obviously we switch to the UK now. We can talk about Brexit again.
Switch gears.
Same thing. It's like you think about from 1997 to 2015. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elections. The political parties, Labour, Conservatives, extremely similar. Yeah. Did things get better for ordinary people between 1997 and 2015 or 2016, whatever? No, I'd say they probably got worse because of the 2008 economic crisis.
And also the big problem with Iraq. Nobody liked Iraq except for idiots.
I don't think the average voter cared that much about Iraq, unfortunately. But so we go into this Brexit election and people are like, well, oh my God, there's finally a chance to change my miserable fucking existence. Maybe I'm being a bit too blunt there, but oh my God, finally I have before Liberal, before Conservative, Labour, it's all the same, innit? As so many people would say that, well, it's all the same. But Brexit, wow, this is interesting. They're promising new things. It's like it's not a political party, and that's the thing. It's not a political party, not associated with any person. It's just an idea. It's just like an idea that they can vote for, and then Brexit wins 52 to 48, very close. Obviously, not everyone voted for it, but therefore, just because of the failure of the political class to help these people to just improve their lives from. I mean, you can say the Conservatives don't really care, but from that Labour government, from 1997 to 2010, 13 years in power, and yes, they did a lot of really good things, but still, they left the country after 2008 in a massive recession, and yes, Labour didn't cause the recession, but they could have mitigated the effects. And now we have a situation in which people are desperate again for change, and they have an opportunity, which is Brexit. So that's what I think ultimately led to Brexit. Obviously, there's other reasons, which is papers pumping out constant anti-EU propaganda for like 30 years. That I guess contributes to it, where people are like, oh, maybe if we do leave the EU, things will change. So that's what I that's what I think on Brexit, and why. Again, ultimately, if you looking back on it and just thinking about how we're trying to reflect on the decade, but just thinking about the last 40 years of neoliberal economic consensus, ultimately it was going to lead to Trump, it was going to lead to Brexit, it had to, and we have the comeuppance in this decade. So anything to say?
Well, I think just a final point on Brexit, really. I mean, I think everything you said is basically right, but
Thank you.
I think the other interesting thing about Brexit is, number one, it's more long lasting than
Trump.
It's
worse than Trump,
because obviously with Trump. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, it's going to have an effect for ages. I actually wanted to do a video on what Labour should do going forward. It's something I really want to make. The problem is I've got just assessments due all through January, and I like a steady stream of them too, so I don't know, probably not going to happen, but maybe in February I'll kind of start season 2 of my actual videos and stuff and get everything going that I'm kind of working on in the background. But anyway, I was going to make a video about that, but basically the best thing Labour can do in terms of Brexit is negotiate a Corbyn-style exit deal. And when I say Corbyn-style exit deal, I basically mean a Labour-style exit deal, which is to say customs union, things like that, after having left. So in other words, we have left, and then they go and say, hey, the EU, we want to integrate a bit more. And that's I think the best case scenario in terms of getting the economy back on track, basically to draw Brexit back in. But obviously it's a constant, and I think the weird thing about it is it's such a big divide in this country. And the thing is, it's interesting whether or not the extent to which it is purely based on just economic or social dissatisfaction on the part of Brexiters, because the alternative is almost a much more horrifying existential notion for the UK, which is that fundamentally we have two almost equally split people in this country. One who wants the UK to become part of this global community, and basically for the UK to pool its sovereignty by accepting that there is an international order which the UK should play a part in, by admitting that the UK is part of an international society. And there's the other group of people who want the UK to essentially exist in this anarchic international order, where they say, hey, it's every man for themselves. We're going to try and get the best deals we can. We're going to negotiate with America and Canada and the EU and the Commonwealth and Japan and do the best we can on our own. And there isn't really a solution. There's no middle ground where that works. There's no solution. And you almost think at some point, maybe we'll just say, you know what? Let's just partition the UK. One side can have their little anarchic free state and the other side can be part of the international community. But who knows? Yeah. So yeah, basically, the main point that I just want to get at is that the problem is, number one, it's a long-lasting issue in terms of its effects. Ultimately, we are not going to be able to. I mean, I'm 99% sure we will leave the EU.
Yes.
I will give Boris Johnson that credit, I suppose, that he'll actually stick to his word and we'll leave the EU. But after that, obviously, I don't think it's going to be possible to just say win the next election for kind of maybe a Liberal Labour coalition. Maybe I'm jinxing it again. Maybe it'll be a Conservative victory again. But I don't think it's going to be possible to win that election and join again. So basically, it's going to be a long-lasting test. And also, there isn't a solution to this divide unless people die off and things change.
Well, that's what I was going to get to the 2019 election, which I think ultimately, what did you say at the end of your last analysis? Things won't change.
The death thing. Yeah, I mean, basically, the only way I can... I mean, things might change if, Brexit is so bad that people realise it's going to be a disaster. The only other thing I can think is that you get a really kind of charismatic person who is able to kind of lead a compelling, sell the vision of, a global community to people, and the people go, yeah, that sounds great. I really want this global community.
It's not going to happen.
That's the thing. It's not going to happen.
Because of the press in our country, they'll never let something like that happen. Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, basically... so I think ultimately what's going to happen is there's always going to be what we really need in this country. I was thinking about this. I don't know if this ever actually happens, in real life. Because Hugh Grant in Love Actually. You don't think about what political party is. You just go, yeah, he's a really nice prime minister. I love me some Hugh Grant. Everyone you get the impression if he was in charge, everyone would be like, yeah, he's good. The problem is obviously, number one, you just don't get that. We're certainly not getting a Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson says he wants to heal this divided nation while he's simultaneously incredibly divisive. And ultimately, I think, again, without falling into bland neoliberalism, we need somebody, and I think this is probably an example of something you literally just cannot have, the two things don't make sense together, but somebody who can simultaneously have a revolutionary approach, an alternative for this country, like a Green New Deal. I mean, I'm not a full-on communist, but I think a Green New Deal, something that's talking about infrastructure reform,
that'd be great.
Green energy, creating jobs, things like that, selling that, and also selling it in such a way that they can say, you know what, this is going to solve the problems for the old people who feel like this country isn't what it used to be.
It's going to cost your family $1,000 a month, £1,000
exactly, that's the thing. But I don't think, all
I
want is for, again, like I say, I'm not so much of a neoliberal that I'm I just want everyone to get along. But I feel like we need to get to a situation at some point where everybody in the UK can go, you know what, I'm happy. I'm reasonably content with who's in charge right now, which I almost feel from 1997 to 2001, maybe even 2003. Obviously, that's when we actually invaded. 1997 to 2001, people were kind of like that.
Well, that was the neoliberal heyday, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing.
There's no point in returning to that because it's going to happen. It's a fantasy.
Circle. The best. Exactly. So we need somebody like Tony Blair who everyone can go, yeah, I love him, but then also somebody who's going to go, and also I'm going to introduce meaningful change that's going to actually, people are going to be able to rally.
You're looking for a fucking unicorn. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Yeah. The best way to think about hope or change in our country based on those
to kill all the right wingers.
2009 election result is literally to wait 30 years and wait for them all to die off. Maybe it'll only take 15 years, and then the culture of the country will have changed the demographics, the country will change so much that, it won't actually take that long. But there's just so many people. That's the thing, why I'm so blunt about it and say, these people, way for a government like Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, or Ed Miliband's Labour, or even Gordon Brown's Labour, anyone who's to the left of Tony fucking Blair, to get in power in the UK is to have just a change in the demographics, because there's so many Twitter threads after the election from activists and campaigners saying, like, there's so many people who just would not vote for Labour and they just couldn't see themselves voting for Labour because of the culture, just the culture war between...
Yeah. Oh, sorry, obvious point though. We just, like, this is so obvious that it just needs to be said. We need electoral reform.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Like, obviously. I mean, of course. I just thought that was like such an obvious thing to go and mention.
It's just like these people are in a completely different world to the one that Labour, the activists, were in, and that is you can't bridge that gap. It's impossible to bridge that gap, and I think ultimately why Jeremy Corbyn's appeals to these people who are who are in places like Blyth and Redcar, who reject Corbyn and his culture, his ethos, and all of that. What could appeal to those people is what the Tories did in the 1980s, and look what Labour are proposing now, like reinvestment in these areas, putting the NHS back to where it belongs, all of that kind of stuff, which could appeal to these people. I think the issue is that since 1997, from 1997 to 2001, voting dropped massively, like the amount of people that voted, like voting percentage, and that is because there was a whole bunch of people who eventually voted for Brexit and voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, who were like so dissatisfied with the Labour government, how it didn't reinvest in those areas. Sure, things got better in terms of the NHS and stuff, but like they were still in pretty much the same economic conditions before Labour got in. So now, and obviously because that was Blair's neoliberal approach, and so make sure no massive spending, just keep everything in the centre as much as possible. So now these people, and this has happened I think across Europe and even in the United States, like these people who would naturally vote Labour because they support their economic interests now don't trust Labour, and now don't see a difference between Labour and the Conservatives, really, because, well, there hasn't, from 1997 to now, there hasn't been a difference. They've been pretty much the same. They've been very similar. I think, I can't remember, there's a book about this which was promoted, which had the thesis that I'm espousing right now, which I think is obviously the correct one.
No, I don't know about that, but yeah.
Well, you don't know about the book or whether it's correct?
I don't know about the book. But I think you're
and that's
broadly
the thing about Corbyn's Labour, or anybody like Corbyn being in charge of the Labour Party, is the paradox. These people will not trust Corbyn. But if he got into power and was Prime Minister and did the things that he said, they would trust him. It's like the way to establish the way to get these people voting Labour again is to have a Labour government and show them what a Labour government can do. But again, that's not going to happen because they're not going to vote Labour in the first place. And it's like, how do you establish trust without actually being able to establish that trust? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the best case scenario is that Labour gets in through kind of like a quirk of the electoral system. Like, basically, they just have somebody who...
Well, with electoral reform, with the changing of the constituencies, that's not going to happen.
Oh, yeah, that's
just gerrymandering the whole UK, which Boris Johnson is going to do, so it's going to be even harder. So
but I mean, ultimately, once they that's the thing. The best case scenario, I think, is for them to get in a divided UK, and then hopefully, because then they become more trustworthy because they do the things they say they'll do, then it will be good. But we'll have to wait and see.
Well, that's looking forward to the next decade. Again, in politics in the next decade, again, Bernie Sanders, he is the hope. He's literally the hope of changing the world, not just the United States. Because once if the United States votes for Bernie Sanders as president, then a lot of things could change, like how a lot of people view the world, how our culture could change. It really could be massive. And then, well, I don't know about the UK, because again, the press in this country, it'll still exist in 2024 in that election. It'll keep on existing. I'm not really hopeful for the future of the UK. I think it's kind of over. But again, what a wonderful way to end, I think, a truly awful decade. A decade where I think we saw neoliberalism come home to roost, really, and the problems associated with it. Right at the end of this decade, in December of 2019, we get a far-right government which is pretty racist, it supports massive deregulation.
It's racist, but it ain't pretty.
Massive deregulation, selling off the NHS, and all this stuff. Yeah, that is what we got at the end of this decade. And it's extremely fitting in that regard, I think. What an awful decade. I hope 2020's better. Oh, we didn't even talk about the fucking climate emergency.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the only thing that needs to be said about that is that it's a disaster.
Yeah, I think this is the first decade where people took it properly seriously. Obviously, Greta Thunberg ends the year as Person of the Year, and I think people.
Oh yeah, that's relevant.
People now, I think one of the reasons why people are more likely to vote for Labour is because they take that situation quite seriously. Because I think, again, just from a selfish point of view, a lot of young people are like, you know what, in 30 years' time, I don't want to be having to fend for my life. Again, I think that does factor into this discussion. But yeah, I think. Yeah, the climate emergency, the first decade, people actually took notice, took it seriously, but again, no government policies to change that. Still, we have people like Justin Trudeau saying, oh yeah, climate emergency, it needs to stop, then granting access to oil pipelines, and obviously Trump's not going to, Boris Johnson, they don't give a fuck about climate change either. It's not looking too good on that front.
Yeah, well, it's the end of the world as we know it.
So... Yeah, I think hopefully we've summed up the decade quite well. I think 2020, it could either get a lot better or a lot worse. I don't know which direction it's going to go in. Probably worse. Yeah, Probably worse. Because these things don't end well.
Let's just be optimistic. Yeah, that's true. This is not going to end the way you think.
So thanks for listening. We've been selecting and reflecting on this decade, this wonderful decade from 2010 to 2019. Truly, truly awful. And again, I think most of the problems stem from previous decades and from 2008 financial crisis. So that's it, basically. Join us next decade. But what are we doing next decade, Michael?
We're doing the 2020s.
Yeah, the 2020s. That should be good. I hope it gets better, but it probably won't. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.
Who knows? Maybe we'll be dead.
Yeah, maybe. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Goodbye.